All right, letters 13 and 14. And Bruce gave us a heads up at the end of last class, and here it is. He said the worm was about to turn. Or maybe he said it differently than that. But the things are going to change, and boy, did it ever. After some congratulations, if not superlatives, letter after letter, this one, writing back to his nephew Wormwood, starts off a little differently. This one, Wormwood is in trouble. Seems to me to take a great many pages to tell a very simple story. Now, what is the there's some kind of aphorism, like success has many parents, but failure is an orphan, something like that. You know that one? So as soon as somebody says they've got a long story, it's almost never good news, is it? Good news, you're so excited, you just kind of blurt it out. But if it's bad news, why does bad news take so long to talk about? You got to explain it. You've got to explain, like, no, you don't understand. There was this guy, and there's this thing. And so we often take a lot longer to explain difficulties, mistakes, or failures, if only for the fact that we don't like them. We don't like the consequences. We don't like the blame. We don't like a sense of I'm not good enough. And so with a lengthy explanation, you're kind of prepping people to say, well, it's not really my fault. Like if you understood the context. Now, when something good happens, we worry a lot less about the context, don't we? Yeah. We worry a lot less about the narrative surrounding it. We just, we
won the game.
We won the game. Woohoo! We're the best. But if you personally lost it, well, then you have to explain how it was a team effort, and well, the sun was in my eyes, and I slipped on a puddle, and yeah, you've got a whole list of reasons to mitigate the bad feelings. And if you understood, you would say, oh yeah, don't worry about it. That's okay, or no problem. And we are seeing a very natural, perhaps, consequence of not liking to be blamed, not liking to be wrong, and not liking to fail. Anybody like to fail? Anybody?
Oh, yeah, sure.
No. Now we know through discussions or public service announcements or whatever that failure can be good. It can be a learning opportunity, and maybe you've read a self-help book, and it reminds us that we learn more typically from failures than we do from successes, because when you succeed, you're just happy and you move on. You don't tend to really think about why or to go over what could be different. But when you fail and we don't like it, we tend to really ruminate, think through it, try to fix it. And so we understand the problem better, maybe, so that we can do something about it. This is all to say, we don't have, remember, Wormwood's letter, but it must have been filled with, well, you don't understand the context, or let me explain. This is a little inside pastoral baseball here. We are not, as an office, and I am not as a individual, unfamiliar with solicitations for money. The person who's having a difficult time or hard luck or a tragedy or a trauma that we don't know, who shows up, asking for help. And as a principal, I mean, I don't broadcast this because then we would have to deal with a lot more often, but I have a pretty high tolerance of being taken advantage of in those circumstances, because there's a lot of taking advantage that happens. And by and large, pastorally, I would rather err on the side of helping out when they didn't actually need help for that reason or quite that much or whatever. You know, the God is gracious to me. God is gracious to us. So yeah, it's probably not what you're saying, but now I don't. I try to be a good steward. I'm not saying we just toss money left and right. I'm not great at parsing out lies and deceptions. I have no particular gift or experience, but I will say I've been doing this for a long time. And the more detail you give me, the less likely it's true. But you can see it. I mean, some people come in and boy, do they have a story. And it's down, it's down to dollars and cents. There was a guy back in my parish in South Florida who would come by a couple of times a year, very, very infrequently, but it was sort of regular, about 2 times a year maybe. And me and the secretary, Wendy, he would come and like, oh, he's coming. Because we had like all these glass walls, so you could see him come in. And we just wait for him. Come on in. What do you got today? And he would give us this super long story. And they were exciting and they were interesting. This guy won an out-of-state lottery 3 times at least. And he had to, I've won the Georgia State Lottery and I have to get up to claim it. And it's got to be a certain number of days, whatever. I mean, he had great stories. And he always asked for this comically small and precise amount of money. I need $16.43. I mean, we were going to give it to him. But it was like, we couldn't wait to hear this tale that he had constructed for this special occasion. And it was a special occasion for us. Like, oh boy, where is he going to this year? He's had to go up for funerals. He's had to go up for, a citation of something. It's always something. And he was very genial about it. Super sincere. I mean, we would never make fun of him, but I never believed him. But we kind of looked forward to this very elaborate story he had constructed. And it was just always hilarious to me how it was, this was not a guy who said, I need my $800 power bill paid for. He was literally, I have to get a bus to Montgomery, Alabama, and it's, $41.12. And he won't take 45. So, there is an element to the longer, more detailed an explanation is, that is far less likely to be true. And Wormwood must have written quite the tale. And Screwtape is having none of it. He says, basically, that's an awful lot of fluff for a very simple point. And the point is, you screwed up. And you could have just said that. Perhaps you think if you tap dance fast enough, no one will notice. Or will be so impressed, like the guy who has that elaborate story that entertained us enough to earn his $13.94. And that's not the way hell works. Hell is not going to be interested in how understandable the circumstance is. Hell seems to be very results oriented. Your intentions notwithstanding, what did you do? And what's the result? And they just want to know that. And Screwtape is just basically saying, you're going to get it. And well, that's on you. So what is such a disaster as far as Wormwood's circumstances is concerned? Because it must be a big deal if he's going all this length to explain it away.
It's totally inefficient.
He let him have fun.
He let him have fun. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. He let him enjoy a almost pure pleasure. Do you remember what it was? What the circumstance actually was?
To go to the old mill.
He took a walk. that he likes and that's pretty and beautiful. And he was probably lost in the moment of enjoying this simple pleasure. And that one simple but true pleasure sparked something. And it's being referred to as almost a second conversion. And Wormwood is in deep, deep trouble.
I really like the description Screwtape gave it on the very first page. The asphyxiating cloud.
Oh, the asphyxiating cloud that comes from the enemy.
Yeah.
Now, it's very interesting, and it's worth unpacking a little bit. First of all, there is some kind of something that is discernible to these demonic spirits that is not discernible to us. And it's not just discernible, it somehow is impenetrable to them. So they can not just see it happening, but it's like a force field almost that they can't get through, and they don't really understand it. They can't fight against it. They can't outwit it. They can't duplicate it. And when it happens, all they can do is be frustrated. It happened on this guy, and that's bad. You got to make sure that didn't happen again. Because if it starts happening again, it might happen a lot. And there are certain people where that cloud is so ever present, we can't even get close enough to touch them.
It's easy to visualize that as the Holy Spirit.
Aha. So the follow-up question would be, what do we think this cloud, this impenetrable cloud is? And I do love the fact that he calls it asphyxiating. So it's maybe not like a force field, like bouncing off of it, but it's like as they start to approach it, it chokes them out, and they have to get away. So what do we think it is? How might we try to define or describe what the demon sees as an asphyxiating cloud?
Well, he talks about grace.
Grace? Absolutely right. Which he hates and he didn't really understand, or at least doesn't understand why, and he hates it. Us little Berman, receiving this from the enemy.
And then he knows that Christian would believe that nature is something that's a gift
Right.
from God, and so therefore good. So that's gonna choke him.
So these little realizations of the benefits that we receive as gifts and not what we have personally built or earned or whatever. Those are all exceptionally dangerous for the demons for a variety of reasons. The biggest of which is, again, we've been mentioning similar things for weeks now. When we as humans think about the big issues, the big topics, even the big dilemmas, we almost can't help but be pulled out of our self-centeredness and think about, when we think big thoughts, we are on God's home turf. And whether or not we think we are or want to be, we are drawing closer to the presence of God just by thinking these big thoughts. And that's why so many times it's like, get him to think little things, get him to think temporary things, get him to think about the minutia, fill his mind with just mediocrity, with fluff, with the unimportant things, because big things, pleasure, that's one of it. So the asphyxiating cloud, I'm going to suggest, will be related to the presence of God.
And God is described often in the scriptures as in a cloud.
When we think, especially in Old Testament terms, the glory of the Lord descending upon the temple like a cloud, filling the temple as though it were smoke. When we think about Israel being led through the desert in the Exodus, By night, it was a pillar of fire. By day, it was a pillar of cloud. How about when Moses goes up to the mountain and it's as though a cloud descends upon the mountaintop, blocking everything from everyone else's view? The presence of God in a very profound and direct sense has several moments within scripture that refer to it as though it were a cloud, whether or not it's a meteorological cloud or just the way we might perceive in our physical sense. But I think he's talking about communing with God. That this man, there in nature, at a pleasurable place, and doing it for no good reason other than enjoyment, has found himself in communion with God. And that is so obliterating to the demon's plans. They're choked by it. They couldn't survive or breathe around it. And imagine the saintly people that he is referring to offhandedly as those whose the cloud surrounds them pretty much all the time, and the demons just can't get near them. To be fellowshipping and communing in the presence of God on an ongoing basis. Now, you can be in fellowship with God everywhere, and he's omnipresent. Look, yeah, okay, fine. But I think we're talking about something somewhat specific here. That there is something about the moment, something about his attentiveness, something about his prayerfulness, something where, and I think we perceive this ourselves, where there are moments where you feel closer to God than others. And I will say, if that is a phenomenon that is more available than we perceive it, is it not the case that when we feel like we're not perceiving it, we can kind of associate the busyness of life? And it's when that busyness stops, when we stop it, that sense kind of has a chance. So I think this is a reference to at least the demonic perspective of what does it look like when someone is having this kind of moment. There's a Curcio, is it close moment in Curcio? There's something. Some practices or devotions have terminology. Like when we do Vacation Bible School, one of the things we'll ask the kids is talking about God sightings. Where did you see God today? And they'll say, it runs the gamut. And some of them are just kind of cute, like, oh, I see God in the clouds. I see God in the rainbow. And then some will be like shockingly profound. I saw God when mommy and daddy were fighting. And then my brother and I prayed, and they came and gave us a hug. And I'm just like, oh. You never know. But as adults, we can still, I think of those moments where we feel something different. One of the reasons we're having so many offerings during Holy Week is to not run you into the ground. Well, you better be here every night, but just to give enough opportunities that anyone can come to something. And maybe the variety of them will give everyone a chance to feel that connection in some way. Mary Lou, you're going to say something?
Because what you're describing is what seems to me is present, I guess is the word I'd say, right immediately after Eucharist.
Okay, great. And ostensibly, that's the way it ought to be, right? Now, we don't always feel that way. It doesn't, sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel profound. I'm going to suggest this guy was walking taking this walk to the old mill, and the cloud was surrounding him before he realized he had something to be thankful, particularly to God, about. Sometimes, I'm going to suggest, it's not the ecstatic experience. Sometimes it sneaks up on you, and you don't even realize it until you realize it. You know, there can be more like, okay, there's a lot in modern, or not modern, but contemporary worship and church practice that is intended to connect the senses in a manner to produce spiritual feelings. Smells and bells in a new way. You know, the church has done smells and bells for a long time. You know, what is a fog machine, laser lights, and evocative rock music other than smells and bells in a different context, right? But that thought of, I mean, if you've been to a worship concert or at a mega church at a big event or something like that, you know, there's a lot of planning involved in getting you to kind of feel this certain way. I'm not going to say that's wrong, but I am going to say that our feelings in and of themselves are not necessarily reliable guides. I think I even mentioned this a few weeks ago, but somebody had posted on my little meme. It's like, you know, I grew up in an evangelical church, and I felt so profound when we had the worship services. And then, you know, in college, I went off to this rock concert, and then I realized I just really like concerts. You know, oh, that's okay. So what I'm suggesting here is this sense of a closeness with God isn't always like, oh, I mean, sometimes it's just like that quiet, profound, like you don't even realize until it's there. I don't think this guy was walking in the woods saying, God, you are worthy of my praise. I just think maybe he was just enjoying himself. And in the moment of joy, he found himself close to God. And that's what's so dangerous about demons. You know, if this is all about manufacturing a feeling, I think the demons can use that. And they can say, oh, yeah. He really likes rock concerts. Get him to go to a bunch of rock concerts. That's awesome. He likes that sweeping feeling that's deep within his heart. Okay, make sure he feels that a lot for really nonsensical reasons. But walking in the woods or down a stony path or whatever, not everybody is a big nature person. I love it. But can you think of a place that you've been where just the pure joy of being where you were? It doesn't have to be for any other reason.
Beach, walking the,
You know?
in the morning.
I love whenever we stay at the beach, I try and I mostly fail, but I really like seeing sunrise over the water. So East Coast Beach, you know, that moment where the light starts to change and you see it spread out over the water. And I mean, you have to kind of time it right, and I have the tendency to oversleep or whatever it is, but there's just something about it. And it just kind of,
It's so comforting.
Yeah.
It's like a new day is coming.
so
Go ahead.
on a mountaintop, overlooking a valley,
Never did nights walking around that little neighborhood. I go out.
yeah,
Totally quiet, big moon above, and some unusual stars up there, like lining up or whatever they are, but there's something weird.
especially when it's dark
And
enough,
it's like, wow,
you know,
yeah.
we're not, you know, overly light polluted around here. You know, Lakeland's definitely grown a lot, but Not as bad as it is in other cities and other locations. But I remember scout camping at Hardy Lakes, which is not that far away, and it's dark. And the stars came out in ways that I can't see from my backyard because it was just so dark. And then off of this massive grassy meadow, the fireflies came up, which I hadn't seen in years. And it was just like,
Magic.
you're lost in the moment. I mean, I wasn't out there to worship. I wasn't out there like, and as I see the stars, I will speak the words of Psalm 21. You know, nothing. But in those moments, whether we're looking for it or not, of genuine pleasure, we are there. It's like being in the portico of the temple. We're there on the threshold of God's presence. And that's why Screwtape is livid at Wormwood's foolishness. As though letting him take a walk were the sort of inane, mundane things that are good to fill our heads with stuffing. He's like, no, you stupid moron. You gave him a shot at real, genuine, simple pleasure. And that's devastatingly dangerous. And I want to think about this straight up, because he kind of ties it into some other things and gives other examples. If the guy was taking this walk in order to take a selfie at the mill in just the right angle and just the right light, he would have not had the clouds surround him, would he? If he had gone on this walk in order to post about it later, about what he saw and how beautiful it was and blah, blah, would he have been surrounded by the, probably not. This is a little bit like the people who go to the restaurant and they're always taking pictures of the food and you wonder if they ever ate it or not. You know, going on some experience and always filming it for themselves rather than experiencing it. You know, when my kids wrestle, I use my phone and I record it. And I record it mostly so they can watch it later because they're interested or they want to, you know, they want to see what it looks like from the outside or learn from something. And it's very valuable to be able to see yourself do something so you can work on it or fix it or develop it. And one of the days at States, my phone broke. Like, I'm not a phone breaker, and it broke. And so, you know, Timmy wrestled, and all I could do was just be there to watch it. And I was present in the moment more than I normally am. Now, I've learned to not watch him wrestle through the phone because even that one, now I aim, but I still try to look live. And that's helped. And I don't know what about it is, but there's something about the real experience rather than, even if it's like, it's live and everything, but there's something about being filtered through the screen. The genuine pleasure of doing something because it gives us joy and for zero other reason. You're not going to get any credibility. You're not going to get any attaboys. You're not going to get any, you know, oh, that's so interesting, or you're so interesting. He was out there for no reason other than love. And that brings us into the presence of God, because who created pleasure? God did. Who created everything? God did. And when we are out of ourselves for just a moment, even if it's for something as mundane seeming as nature, the demons know that there is a risk. As soon as you're outside of your own head, you are now in a place that is far closer to the presence of God, which they can't stand. So he mentions, this is like a second conversion. In this beautiful moment, he starts having these feelings, he starts thinking these thoughts, and he begins maybe taking seriously, I've really not done well these last few weeks. There's something precious and real about what's happening in this moment. And me hanging out with those witty people from the last little while, that just really pales in comparison, doesn't it? And now there's like a sobering happening. And this second conversion is this reawakening, reawareness of the goodness of God, the presence of God, our gratitude. That's the old, at Thanksgiving Day, if you are giving thanks, who are you thanking? But by definition, really, you are, even people who don't think that they're doing anything religious at all, well, who are you thanking for all the things that you have and all of the benefits and everything else? You're not thanking the turkey, just being thankful and grateful in and of itself almost invariably pulls us into the presence of God. Because where do these things come from? Whether or not you're willing to say it or articulate, or you don't even like those thoughts. I don't believe in God, but I'm really overwhelmed with gratitude. So,
family,
yeah,
friends, and good smells,
right? And you just have this feeling of, I'm just so glad. And it's about something that we really can't even manufacture on our own. Like, we could set up those exact same circumstances and not get that feeling. When it happens, it kind of happens. So again, the demons must prevent us from enjoying genuine pleasures. Reading a book, listening to music, going on walks. It sounds like these are unimportant things that the demons would like us to do. But if we're doing them for the sake of simple pleasure, we're actually far closer to the presence of God than they want us to be. If he's going to read a book, make sure he's reading it in order to quote it to someone else, or to brag about the fact that he read that book. If it's a simple pleasure, we can't help but feel glad and grateful. We can't help but think about the nature of pleasure, at least in some fashion. And then boom, there's the suffocating cloud in the presence of
And
God.
I have to say, last time they did the Stations of the Cross, I had one of the most meaningful communions.
Oh, I'm so glad.
It really, really gets you.
I am so glad.
It's very-
Just FYI, I looked up Child Herald or Werther that gets referenced. So Child Herald, it's an epic poem written by Lord Byron, and Werther is it's a novel by Goethe. So these are both very, very influential in the Romantic movement, and they're both like world-weary youth who are there only to just experience the depth of feeling. And one of them,
13 years old.
yeah, one of them commits suicide over a long lost love, and one of them travels the world seeking wisdom, kind of stuff. And it's super self-indulgent, and it's very, very teenagery. No one can possibly understand me, kind of stuff. So he's saying, that's one of your appeals. If he's going to feel emotions, make sure he's feeling them in a way that allows him to feel so misunderstood and so deeply, deeply special. Because again, every strong emotion could potentially draw him into the presence of God. So you better do your darndest to get it to loop back inside of him. This navel gazing kind of, I'm just, I'm not like you. I feel things so deeply. Just so deep. You don't understand. You can't understand the burden on such a sensitive soul as mine. And that's what he's referencing there.
Remind me of that never run that movie. And
I-
deep.
Okay, there you go. There's a beautiful little line about remember always, he actually likes these little vermin. And there's just this casual disgust for us constantly that is, the demons actually recognize God genuinely loves us. They just can't fathom it.
Well, they're better than us because they're pure spirit.
Well, they're pure spirit. If God's going to love anybody, why? First of all, love is stupid, obviously, because we're demons. But these little raggedy, stupid creatures that like crawl on their feet and junk. There's a distaste that drips from this that's always kind of fun to see. Ultimately, these deep feelings, these profound experiences, whatever it is, must be turned back inward or else. If he can't get this guy to be self-satisfied somehow, then it could be an absolute disaster. We will get into this discussion of humility. By all means, avoid him, having humble thoughts. But if you can't do that, turn them instantly into self-congratulatory, aren't I so dang humble? But even that, and this, that's one, and I've mentioned that in sermons before, how elusive humility as a virtue can be. Because as soon as you start feeling good about being humble, you're kind of losing your own, you lose it. I'm so proud. It's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. But he kind of adds a dimension to it that I think is sometimes lost. You can't push him too hard, or else he might see how comical it is for him to be congratulating himself on his humility. And once he starts laughing at himself, then he is being pulled back into the present. Anything that pulls us away from ourselves, anything that allows us to put ourselves in proper proportion. Hell wants us to take ourselves so seriously, because hell takes itself seriously, remember? Everything that they do is dour and very serious and dignified. And as soon as we are overly concerned about our own reputations, our positions, our dignities, we are now so self-centered. That cloud of God's presence, we're turning away from it in order to stare at ourselves. This next letter, with kind of the practical dangers of that, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Or, as we're going to hear so soon, since we're very close, as of this recording, we are, a week from tomorrow is Maundy Thursday. The mandatum, the commandment, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another, Jesus says, as I have loved you. That's the new commandment. Not just as yourself. Love some other person in the way that Jesus loves you. Can you do it? The commandment. That's a big deal. But here's Screwtape kind of giving us, it's the inverse, but we're getting this beautiful understanding of what the promises of God look like. When we will lose ourselves for the sake of the gospel, we actually gain everything. When we become his servants and his slaves, we're actually finally freed. When we love our neighbor even more than ourselves, we will actually gain the truest sense of ourself that we've ever had. And the demons know that this defeats everything that they've got, and it has to be avoided at all costs. When we are willing to give it up for the sake of God, we don't actually lose anything that we give away. We regain it, maybe even bigger and better and more lasting than we ever would have had it otherwise. You don't become less of yourself. You become more as you were supposed to be. Your truer self. To be the whole slave language. There's most of the time within the New Testament, I'm not going to say every time because that's not true. Most of the time when we come across an English translation that talks about being a servant of God or a servant of the Lord, the Greek word doulos, douloi, translated servant, it is more likely that a closer translation is slave. We don't like that word. There's reasons to not like that word. I'm not saying this is a wrong, I'm just saying it's complicated. But to be a servant of Christ strikes our ear in our context differently than saying I'm a slave of Christ. That has such a negative connotation within our culture, within our understanding, within our history. But written in, especially the first century, most of those circumstances were written slave. Some were servant, like we would, you hire someone to do your menial tasks, but more often than not, by far, this was talking about slavery. It's unpleasant to consider in many ways. But that promise of being a slave to Christ, we are not in bondage. We're being freed from bondage. Everybody's a slave to something. That's kind of the existential truth. What are you a slave to? I'm a slave to fashion. We are slaves to sin and death. We are slaves to a broken nature. We are slaves to a corrupted world. We're slaves to our ways of thinking. We are slaves to our deficiencies, our mortality. We are slaves to the ruts in which we find ourselves in. To be transferred from one owner to another is to be transferred from an owner who seeks to consume or destroy us to one who desires to free us and redeem us. What does Jesus say other than take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you will find me gentle and lowly in heart. My burdens are easy, light. We are freed when we are owned by him. You've seen read articles or documentaries about people who will go into the modern day slave trade in a foreign country, and they will buy children in order to set them free, or people who will go to the dog track, and we're going to these losing animals, we're gonna kill them all, and he rescues them. This is the book of Ruth, and Boaz coming and claiming Ruth as his wife. I shall be your kinsman redeemer. This is the image and the allegory of us being sold into a slavery that we can't get out of, or about to be killed because we can't perform. And someone has pity and mercy and buys us in order to set us free. the demons, this is a disaster for them when we do this and when we recognize it. Everything is about, if you can't stop these feelings, if you can't stop these thoughts, then flood them with the mundane inanity of saying, well, this happens in a lot of circumstances. I have these feelings in other places or all the time, you know, whatever it might be. Fill their heads with stuff that's not special, it's no big deal. Because as soon as we start feeling the enormity of what this means, the demons have lost. And it sounds like they'll be punished. So they're doing their best to not lose.
I like one of the last lines in 13:2. Let him do anything but act.
Say that again.
Let him do anything but act.
Ah,
While he's only
That's
thinking
right.
about himself, he's not.
if he is thinking these wrong thoughts for them, that's bad enough. Make sure then it never filters out in his behavior. He's thinking big thoughts. That's very dangerous. Make sure then with everything that you can do that he doesn't act on these thoughts. Change his life, change his perspective, treat people differently. This is a piece of, I might have even said this before, it might have even been in this class, but earlier on. It's a piece of advice that I always give in marital or premarital counseling. Our feelings and our emotions wax and wane like the moon. Act in a loving fashion, and the feelings will come back. If you're having these feelings and these thoughts, but you're not actually acting, what good will those feelings and thoughts do? Very, very little. Very, very little. And as a matter of fact, that's when maybe they start to dissipate or go away. If they exist only in our heads, then there's no appreciable change. And being so disconnected from everything else, they either stay in a bubble or they just start to evaporate, dissipate, and maybe even just go away. We are bodies and souls intended to be in union. And when we act on only one side of those, it just either something bad's going to happen or it's not sustainable. We are intended to have body and soul work together. This is the faith and works and how they ought to, be manifest in one another and all that kind of stuff. It's all wrapped up theologically. It's all wrapped up scripturally. But ultimately, God has created us as embodied spirits, body and soul together. So if there's something internal, but there's nothing visible external, either what's the point or it won't last. And if we're doing the right thing, but it's making no difference in here or we're completely unaware of it, what lasting good will it do for us? So again, whatever can be done to keep that bifurcation, that split, keep it separated out, whatever you can do, don't let him act on it. And again, 14 brings us to that, almost in this backward, perverse way, but kind of a treatise, an essay on the extravagant, gracious love of God, who gives us these gifts purely so that we might enjoy them and therefore enjoy him. And that is despicable to the demons as well as nonsensical. They can't fathom why in the world he would do this, but it also seems awful to them. Both a waste and maybe, creepy or stupid or something. And yet, the humans live in our time, in time, but the enemy destines them to eternity. He wants them to attend chiefly to two things, to eternity and to the point in time in which they call the present. For the present is the point in which they touch eternity. There's an old phrase about someone who is so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. If you've ever heard that or something like that. You know, I have had conversations with people who want to talk about, you know, these deeply spiritual things that actually I think is kind of shallow, but it's, you know, oh, I just want to talk about the glories of heaven. And it just, you know, I kind of, it just, it feels a little hollow to me because it seems like, what's the difference here? But then obviously that the other side of people who just live in the, like, live in the now, carpe diem, baby, that there's no sense in what we do echoes through eternity, that what we do has consequence for good or for bad. But I think it's actually quite a lovely way of putting it. The present is where our lives touch eternity. That is our intersection between ourselves and forever, is the now. And that imagine your geometry for a second. A line and a point on that line. Lines are actually made of an infinite series of points, individual points. So is our past and our future, the flow of time, you know, in a line. Every one of those points is critical and essential, but there is a, you know, limitless number. We exist in a point. That is the intersection of that line. That moment, although it's already passed, and it's already passed, and it's already passed, and it's already, that is where we touch eternity. And I would say it's even more than a line, it's a plane. 3 dimensions, 4 or more. We're in that one point right now. To think that we touch eternity means that what we do right here, right now, is of incredible, infinite significance. But it's also just one point. It is a point that exists within this larger, fuller realm. What we do must be considered important, but it's never the end. And it's always the tiniest part of the greater whole. And it's a little paradoxical to try to wrap our finite brains around. But it is it's fascinating that the demons see this. And they want us to never consider it. Lila, you're gonna say something?
Well, it reminds me of those things we used to do in art class. And then you scrape away the darkness and you something out of it.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah,
I love to do that.
very nice.
Never know what to do.
Very nice. So this sounds like good news for our human. Sounds like bad news for Wormwood. But the letters are going to keep coming. And so we're just going to have to see, you know, if he will continue to progress or if Wormwood can get his hooks back into him. This is, you know, it's the precarious nature of our own lives. We are always a moment away, one way or the other, aren't we? And so we've finally seen, you know, good things, genuinely good things happen within this guy's life. So there's now this huge turmoil and this massive sense of necessity on Wormwood's part. I better do something about it or else. And so now we're going to start seeing you know, what's gonna happen next, what can be done, what will be done. For good or for bad. Anything else?
Yeah, about the book.
Mhm.
How he twists about writing a book. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of C.S. Lewis writing this.
Ah, right? Yeah, it is. There is a little semi-autobiographical element in this as he's, borrowing moments from his own life and struggle that he had and all epiphanies
Yeah,
that he had.
and I think he's questioning when he's writing this. He says sterilizing the seeds which the enemy plants in the human.
It is, once you start, being an observer of yourself, it can go a couple of ways. One is depth of humility, but another is by distancing yourself from some of those real and good things, you lose some of their benefit.
That when you start thinking of yourself in the third person.
Yeah, nobody likes, when people refer to their own names in the third person, because just the pretense of it all. But you also, it's like pulling yourself out of the moment again, and pulling yourself away from the experiences that were real, as though you're some dispassionate, neutral observer, which you're not. But yeah, I love the sterilize the seed things.
Can't create and.
That's right. That's right. It looks the same from the outside, but a sterilized seed will never bloom and grow. There's the old Chinese proverb, the story about the emperor sending out seeds to the children and water it for 30 days, and the most beautiful plant will win a prize or something. And all these kids come back with these beautiful things, and the one kid comes and he's so sad and like, I'm so sorry. I did everything that I could. I watered every day and it never grew. He gets the prize because all the seeds have been boiled. None of them should have grown. And the real test was not, could you grow a seed? The real test is, who was going to be honest? So that's that, being an author doesn't make you dishonest, but you could lose, it could boil that seed until what was alive in it is now dead.
Yeah.
You can describe it. You can describe it in great detail, but the real benefit is now gone. Again, are you walking that walk to the old mill because it's going to make for a ripping yarn in your story, or because it's good?
And I think we have to learn a lot about listening to other people. They're telling you like their story.
Yeah.
And you have to be quiet and pay attention.
How many times do we listen to somebody talk and mentally we're preparing our response rather than actually listening to them? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.